keep going with number 40. I think this is about where we stopped last time. Okay, so I hope you remember from last time. Our goal here is to match these particular sentences with these forms of sentences. We want to know which one of these sentences is of this pattern or this form. So let's keep going with this one right here. Did anybody have this one last time? I had assigned people to some of them. I can't remember quite where we were.
Which one?
What number is this?
They're not numbered.
What letter is that?
And you can try to letter them, but that doesn't really work either. And I realize that's frustrating, but that is how it is. It's that one.
The one that looks like that. That's written like that.
I think, did you have one?
I
thought I had that
one. The one
Was
before that.
That's the seventh one on the sheet.
Yeah.
Which one?
I had 11.
All right,
I had that one.
Nick. Since you had it, you should have the answers, right?
I think we went
Tell
over
us
that
about
last
this one. We might have gone over it last time.
We did, but it was 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10. It wasn't 7 or 8 because those inaccurately represent
Oh, you good, yeah.
the second section,
Yeah, the not before that.
and yeah,
Good.
and then it wasn't 9 because that also inaccurately represents the first section, I believe.
Right, because of this negation here, right? Yeah. I was
And the second.
hung up on number 9 for a second. If that was gone, it would not even work, but it doesn't. Good. So yeah, I think this is coming back to, we did talk about this one last time. 2 and 3, because it's conditionals in both cases. It's 4, because the antecedent is negated here. It's 5, because the consequence negated here. And it's 10, because the antecedent of the big conditional is a negated conditional right here. These two things tell us that it is an example of form number 10. Okay. Good, and that sounds right. I think we did end on that one last time. Okay. Next we had this one. Does anybody want to do that one? Okay. Jake. Which
He's
one?
just putting his mouth, he can't even talk.
2, 3, 7, 8, and 9.
Okay, so Jake says this is forms 2, 3, 7, 8, and 9. 2 and 3 are the easiest. Why is it 2 and 3?
Because it's negated. It's a horseshoe thing.
Yeah, just because it's a conditional, as long as it's a conditional. 2 and 3 just say that this is a conditional with some sentence at the beginning and some sentence at the end. Same with 3. Some sentence at the beginning and some sentence at the end. Okay, so this definitely matches 2 and 3. That's right. Now tell me about 7, 8, and 9. Why is this an instance of form 7?
Because there's one parenthetical around the thing on the left side of the equation, right? And then there's 2 around the thing on the right side, and that's the same for the other and it can be since it's in a big thing, right? You know what I'm saying?
I see. Okay, so the key here is we got to see which whole sentence can we map onto a sentence form here. P. So which one's P?
The entire thing.
It's going to be this whole thing.
Yes.
It's going to be our P.
Mm-hmm. And it can also be P and Q in number 9.
So let's just deal with one form at a time. In form 7, this is our P. And then which one's our Q in form 7?
C.
This C is our Q. Good? And then which one's our R?
R is C and B.
Good. So the really crucial way you tell that this is an example of form 7 is that it's, first of all, a big conditional. We've got this part in it. And then second of all, the consequent of the big conditional is itself a conditional. So that's how we tell. We check over here. Our big connective is a conditional. And then the consequent of that conditional is itself a conditional. So that's how we tell we've got an instance of Form 7.
Form 8 the exact same, is it?
Okay, so it is an example of Form 7. Now, Jake, tell me about Form 8. Why do you think
Same.
this is an example of Form 8?
It's like 2 and 3, they're the same thing but with different variables.
So, in Form 8, we starts out with a P, right, as the antecedent of the big conditional. So what's our P?
C and B and B. That, not and, but that whole thing.
This whole thing is P. Okay. And then what's our Q?
C.
So this whole thing is going to, this C right here is going to be our Q. And then what's supposed to go next is P.
Which has to, would have to.
So that
be
tells
the
me
side conditional.
I should see this whole thing
Oops.
in here.
I will too.
So this one is in fact not an example of Form 8 because this part and this part would have to match for it to be an example of Form 8. And they're not the same because we've got this extra B here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is not an
I just thought
example
it
of Form 8.
was something with a different variable than 2 and 3. But
So
fine.
it would work if we had the same thing in this antecedent and this consequent. That's what we would need for it to be an example of Form 8. And we're close. We've got the C horseshoe B, but we have this extra horseshoe B in the first part and not in the second part. So this is in fact not an example of number 8.
But it is number 9. Because P is C and B.
Okay. You're right, I'm going to talk it through, but let me just rewrite this without all the scribbles on it so we can see clearly what's going on in this line again.
That's why I like this smart party. Just go.
Yeah.
Okay. C, horseshoe B,
No, the parentheses that said the C.
horseshoe B. And then C, horseshoe, C, horseshoe B. Okay. Right, yeah, okay. So that's our sentence. And you want to say it is an example of Form 9. What's our P over here?
C horseshoe B.
So we know that this is our P because it's the antecedent of the conditional
Inside the
in
conditional.
the big antecedent of the big conditional. So this is in fact our P right there.
Yep.
Okay, and then what's our Q?
B
Is this B? And then what's our R?
is the C horseshoe.
whole
and
thing.
C horseshoe B.
The consequent of the big conditional is our R. So it is an example of Form 9. It's not an example of Form 4, 5, 6, or 10 because all of those have a negation in them.
Or
Since
one.
there's no negation in this, it's not going to be an instance of any form that has a negation in it, like 4, 5, 6, and 10. Okay, so those are all our answers, 2, 3, 7, and 9. Okay. Let's move on to this one. Does anybody want to help me with this next one? Okay. Laura, go for it.
2, 3, and 9.
So 2, 3, and 9?
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's also
Any other ones? Just 2, 3, and 9. Okay, so let's start out with numbers 2 and 3. Why do you think it's an example of 2 and 3?
I have 7 for that.
Put a 7 with a question mark in the back of that one.
Because it has the parentheses, which is the first part.
I mean, the parentheses are a clue maybe, but
I feel like
Because it's it has an antecedent and that consequence.
Yeah,
In the
the way we
entire-
tell for sure
Two
is just
parentheses and
that
one parenthesis.
the whole big sentence is a conditional. This conditional is connecting this sentence to this sentence. I mean, that's all 2 and 3 are saying, is that we've got a sentence with a horseshoe and then another sentence after it. And I mean, I'm thinking maybe you're noticing the parentheses are helping you decide that this is an antecedent of the whole thing. So yeah, the parentheses give us a guide to which one is the main central connective that's connecting the two big parts. And that's the key, is that the main central connective connecting the two big parts is a conditional. And that's enough to make sure that it's definitely forms 2 and 3. Okay, so it is forms 2 and 3. Okay, how about form 9? How did you know it was form 9?
For Form 9, it was the parentheses of A or B conditional, another parentheses, A or B, and that's in another parentheses for
Good.
the first.
P was A or B.
So like
A or B.
so we had our big conditional, and then
Yeah.
parentheses around another littler conditional, right? And we've got the same thing here. Got a big conditional and then a little conditional inside the big conditional. So is this part going to be our P?
Yeah. P
And this part's going to be our
Q.
Q. This part's going to be our R. Form 9. Okay, so it is an example of Form 9. Good. Now, Zach says he thinks it's an example of Form 7. Tell us about that, Zach. Why do you think it's an example of Form 7?
Because the P can represent, well, I mean, obviously 7 is a 2-part thing, but the P can represent the A or B in the parentheses, and then there's another set of parentheses just on the opposite side. It's just a different grouping of 9, basically.
Okay, so 7 and 9 are very similar, except the parentheses are in a different order, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Parentheses
Jake.
matter.
Parentheses matter.
So why do the parentheses matter? Why
Because
does it make a difference?
This one, you can't have, the first bit could be correct, but you can't have Q, horseshoe, R cannot be A or B, because A or B is one.
It's an or instead of horseshoe.
That's right. We'd have to have a conditional in the consequent over here to be an example of Form 7. So, I mean, it's tricky to do examples where this is obvious. But here we've got P is the antecedent of our conditional. 7 says if P is true, then some other stuff is true. 9 doesn't say that. It says if P horseshoe Q is true, then some other stuff is true. They have a different antecedent. They also have a different consequent. These are different conditionals, even though they're closely related. But changing the order of the parentheses does really matter for conditionals. All right. There is actually one other form that this is an instance of. This is an instance of one of the other forms. It's not an instance of Form 7 because the parentheses are wrong.
Form 8. Yeah, 8.
Form 8. Okay.
Wait, no?
Yes.
Yes. Nick, do you think it is an example of Form 8?
I think that even though there are parentheses in
It
the
is.
one that we're one on the left, that P can represent both sets of parentheses.
So what's our P?
Our P would be
This can't be.
parentheses, parentheses, A or B.
P is A or B. And A or B is over here too, right?
Yeah.
So that's how we know it's an example of Form 8, is that our P
Steve.
is A or B, and our Q is also A or B, and then P again is A or B.
Steve.
Yeah.
It can't be that
That's not correct.
parentheses don't hold it.
Because there's
together,
no,
they're separate.
because they're separate. You can't, this needs to be, it would need to like number 7, this needs to be A.
So here's why it doesn't. It's because A or B is P.
Yeah.
Yes.
A or B is P. So we've just plugged in P over here and over here. Oh,
Or
it
what
is.
about, where's Q on that side?
Q's right here.
Wouldn't that also be
That's
P?
not, that's.
There isn't a
that's-
parentheses
Oh.
when we get together.
Ah.
I'm sorry, I made the mistake now. I made the mistake.
It looks
Got
like
it.
it because there's a parentheses, but
Christ.
there isn't a second one.
Okay, I made a mistake. Let me take it back and explain what I did wrong. Thank you. So yeah, it's the same issue with the parentheses, and I got mixed up and I thought it was the other way. Good.
Is this recorded?
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we'd have to have the parentheses switch. So there's
Yeah.
parentheses there and there because there are parentheses around the Q and the P there. So yeah, I made a mistake. The way this is similar to Form 7 is that we do have the same bit
Yep.
here and
Form
here,
eight, I mean.
which is why I was tempted and tricked by that one. But the parentheses are in the other order. So thank you, Jake. You're right. It's not actually an example of Form 8 either. Okay, so I think just 2, 3, and 9 for that. Okay. Maida, will you help us out with the next one?
2, 3, 7, 8.
Is it 2, 3, 7, 8? We're getting a lot with 2 and 3. And it's for the same reason as before, right? That we've got one sentence conditional, another sentence. As long as we've got a conditional, it's going to be an example of Form 2 and Form 3. Okay, now tell us about Form 7. Why do you think it's an example of Form 7?
Because P can be C, conditional B, and then the rest of it can be. Oh, because then
So what's our Q going to be?
B,
Good. And then what's our R going to be?
C.
The parentheses wrong in the state. Oh, no, never mind. I'm looking at the wrong. My bad.
There was a double parentheses.
My bad. Wait, is this, which one are you doing?
10?
This one.
Oh, yeah, my bad. I was thinking one.
Okay. Good. So Maida, you're absolutely right. This is an example of Form 7. I double checked the parentheses. They are in the right spot this time, right? Around this conditional. Good. How did you know that it was also an example of Form 8?
Because C and B appear twice.
Yeah, good. We've got the C horseshoe B that shows up here, and that's our P. And all we need for this to be an example of Form 8 is that this is also our P, right? So yeah, that's the thing to check for is, well, first of all, are the parentheses in the right order? And then, do we have the same sentence here in this antecedent as in this consequent? And we do. So you're absolutely right. That is an example of Form 8. Okay.
You're trying to prove them wrong.
No, I was
Lydia.
just saying, yeah.
Lydia, how do you feel about helping us with the next one? You gonna try it at least?
I can try.
Okay. You can at least find some of them, I think.
Okay, yeah.
My mom made me go
Easy.
to the exam.
So,
A sinus infection.
Dying.
Stop, Jake.
would it be 2 and 3?
It is. How do you know?
I don't know. I just kind of guess.
So anytime your main connective is a conditional,
Oh.
it's going to be one of these.
Okay.
And the reason is that all this says is that it's a conditional. It's of the form, if one thing, then another thing.
Okay, so then it would be also 4, right? Because,
Good. How do you know it'll be 4?
Because, like I said, it's connecting by the conditional.
Yeah.
And it also has that
Not.
squiggly
The
thing.
negation, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um,
Form 4 says just if not one thing, then another thing, right? And that's what we've got here. We've got not one thing, then another thing.
Would it also be 5 and 6?
Let's do one at a time. How about 5?
Oh,
Why is it
okay.
going to be 5? Do you think?
Is it possibly because it has the horseshoe in the
This horseshoe?
other
This one?
kind of matches it, kind of.
There's some stuff that's close, right? We've got a horseshoe and then a negation after it,
And
right?
then also there's another one right there.
And
but
then
it
there's a
has
horseshoe and a
parentheses.
negation over here. So that's a hard one.
It would
Do
be
those make it an example of Form 5? Nick says no.
Jake says
You're
yes.
right. This is a tricky one. Why?
I say
Because
yes.
if it were, it would need the negation in the front, because it's saying if this positive thing, then this negative thing, instead of if this negative thing, then this positive thing.
Good. So 5 says if one thing, then not another thing,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So we
Why is
need
that not?
the whole thing to be an if-then statement where there's a not at the end. So these parentheses here, this one and this one, they tell us all this stuff goes together as the antecedent of the conditional, and that this is the consequent of our big conditional.
Is it not 5 because the negation and the consequent is out inside the parentheses?
It's not 5 because this negation is inside the parentheses. So
Oh.
if this negation were out here,
Oh.
then we'd have
Excuse
if
me.
one thing, then not another thing.
Okay.
But instead, we have if one thing, then this thing and this thing. And yes, there's a negative in here, but we would need the whole thing negated, like out front of the parentheses, to be Form 5.
Okay.
So it's not an example of Form 5. Does that make sense, Lydia? Why that's not an example?
Yeah.
Since the negation's inside, it would have to be out here
Okay. Yeah.
to be Form 5.
Then would it work for number 6 because the negation's outside of the parentheses by B and C and the other B and C?
So the negation is way out front here. Does that make this an example of Form 6?
Yes. No.
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 It's a tricky one.
No
Maida,
parentheses.
why do you think no?
Because the rest of it isn't in parentheses.
That's right.
I
So
hate this game.
the negation has to be around the whole sentence. This negation is just covering the underlined part, not the whole conditional. To make it an example of Form 6, we need to throw in another big giant pair of parentheses there. That would do it. That would make it an example of Form 6. Okay. So not 5 or 6. What about 7?
No.
Lydia, what do you think about Form 7? Is this an example of this form?
Oh, no.
You're right. How can you tell?
I don't know, I just can, and because everyone else said no.
Everyone else said no.
Yeah.
That gives you a decent chance, at least if other people are paying attention. Yeah, Laura.
It's not, there's not a conditional between B and C.
That's
It
right.
needs to be a conditional. Right.
So Form 7 is telling you that you have a conditional whose consequent, the right-hand side, is also a conditional. So to have Form 7, you have to have a conditional, and on the right side, have another conditional. So the right side of the conditional is this part, right? And that's just a conjunction, not a conditional. We do have a conditional on the left side, but that's not what Form 7 says. So it's also not an example of Form 7. For the same reason, it's not going to be an example of Form 8.
As you have told us.
8 has to be has to have a conditional on the right side, and then the extra thing is that this part has to match this part.
As you have,
Yeah. So sort of same issue with parentheses not going in the right order for it to be of the form. If there were parentheses right there, it would match form 7. Okay, how about form 9? Zach, do you want to help me with this one? Do you think this is an example of form 9?
Wait, okay, that one.
This one.
How is it an example of Form 9 you're asking?
is it?
I'm just asking, is it or not?
Yes. Wait, actually no, because there's, oh no, it can't, because the negation in front of them can be represented by the variables in there. It doesn't matter.
So you're thinking, well, there's a big conditional
Yeah.
and a little conditional in the antecedent right there.
Yeah, and the negations don't impact if it fits or not, because the number 9 can represent, those variables can represent the negations inside of them.
Okay, so like this right here could be Q, right?
Yeah.
Could be that whole thing.
Right.
And then this right here could be R. And this right here could be P. That's what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Okay.
The only issue with that I see
Good.
possibly could be the second not.
This one right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just because that would, making it 9 would say that
Q.
both of those things are different, but they're the same because they're both separated by the not with parentheses.
But
Well,
the thing is,
not goes into the parentheses to come in.
So Laura, what were you just saying there?
The not like just kind
Which
of
one? This one?
Yeah, that it kind of isn't it just like merge with parentheses to become the one.
well,
I mean,
one thing.
It doesn't merge with
I mean, it
them,
doesn't
but
merge with
this
them,
is
but
a
it
whole
counts as the
sentence.
same thing.
This right here is a whole sentence that can be our Q. That's
Yeah.
okay, actually. This right here is a whole sentence that can be our R. That's fine.
Isn't it like
Jake.
you can have a negation in a sentence that doesn't have a negation? No. So what are these 1 through 10? What are they called?
Forms?
Forms. So you can have a negation in a form that doesn't have a negation, but you can't have a. You can't have no negation in a form that has negation.
Right.
So yes.
There is actually a problem with this being an example of Form 9.
Why is that thing?
There's a problem.
Is it because of the not at the beginning?
It's because of the not at the beginning.
But that does.
That confuses me.
So Laura, why do you think this not at the beginning is a problem?
I guess, yeah.
Is it because there isn't a second parentheses around the P conditional Q in the form, and so it doesn't include that?
So the issue is that Form 9 is a conditional, and the antecedent of that conditional is another conditional. Over here, we do have a big conditional and a little conditional on the left side, but the problem is that the antecedent of the big conditional includes the negation. The negation is part of the antecedent. So the whole antecedent is a negated conditional. So it's not actually going to fit Form 9 because of that negation.
But didn't you tell me or us that if the form doesn't have a negation, the sentence can have a negation?
The sentence can have a negation. So here's how it would be okay. It would be okay if
It was inside the
I
parentheses.
moved this over there.
So if it's
If
outside,
it were like that, it would be fine. Then it would be an example of Form 9.
if it's outside, it's different.
If it's outside, it's different. And that's just because this is a negated conditional. It's not a conditional anymore. The antecedent of the big conditional is a negated conditional. How about Form 10?
Yes,
Jake says it is an example of Form 10. Why?
because it's just what we're talking about, but it has a negation.
Exactly right. This is an example of Form 10 because Form 10 says you've got a big conditional whose antecedent is a negated conditional. And that's exactly what we have here. A big conditional, and the antecedent is a negated conditional. So that is an example of Form 10 as well. All right. Bear, will you help us with the
11?
12.
Yeah, the one that says A horseshoe B horseshoe A horseshoe B.
Okay, well, he doesn't have any negation.
Yep. That means you could just rule out all the ones that have negations in them.
Of course I did. Because they didn't care.
Okay, so
He just shut
Definitely
down.
2 and 3. It's definitely 2 and 3 because it's a conditional, right?
7, 8,
Okay.
9.
9.
What? Did I do something
No,
wrong?
no, no, it's fine.
So you think 2, 3, 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're
So
all staring.
it definitely is 2 and 3. What we can tell is just that we've got this conditional in the middle there. That tells us it forms 2 and 3 because they just say one sentence conditional, another sentence. Okay, now tell me about number 7. Why is it an example of number 7?
Why do we keep going back to number 7?
It's one of the trickier ones, that's for sure.
Oh.
That's for sure. And I don't know, just it was the next one that you had mentioned.
Oh. Why does he keep going back to number 7?
How do you know it's an example of number 7?
Because of the amount of the conditional?
Okay, it does have conditionals. Yep. The way to tell for sure is if you can replace part of this sentence by the variables, right? And then have everything come together. So which part would you say is the P, is playing the P role in this sentence?
A and B?
This part right here. Yeah. That's our P. The way we can tell is that that part's the antecedent of the big condition. So that's definitely our P.
And the other one is our Q.
Which one's our Q? Just A or the whole thing?
The whole thing?
It's not going to be the whole thing
Don't
because
do it, don't do it,
You
don't
guys
do it.
can't come in with that.
Don't do it. No.
This is gonna knock the entire class
Be the
though.
conditional.
so what we want is somewhere to put our Q and our R, right? So we've got 2 spots left. And if we make the whole thing our Q, we're not going to have anywhere to put the R, right? So it's not going to quite match if we make the whole thing our Q. If we make this one our Q, this one our R, then we've got the exact same pattern. P, horseshoe, Q, horseshoe, R. And that's what we had here, right? P, horseshoe, Q, horseshoe, R. So that assignment of P, Q, and R tells us for sure it's definitely Form 7 if we can do that. Okay, someone else tell me about Form 8, Laura.
Form 8 is basically the same thing, but I don't think it works.
You think it doesn't quite work actually?
Yeah.
Okay. Why doesn't it work to be an example of Form 8?
The first conditional and the last one can't be the same.
They have to be.
Because like,
Yeah.
yeah, because A conditional, B, like they're both the same, but you also would need a Q.
Right.
There isn't
Good.
anything extra.
So, for it to be an example of Form 8, we have to have a match between this first part and this last
Is
part,
anything
right?
for me?
And there is
Yeah.
Oh,
a
there's
match,
one.
right? Like this part's the same as this part. But it's not the match we need.
Yeah.
To be an example of Form 8, we would need a match between the antecedent of the little conditional in these parentheses and this. So these things would have to be exactly the same to have an example of Form 8.
But number 9.
there were a bunch of times we looked for an example of Form 8, and the only time we found it was here, where we had this match between C horseshoe B and C horseshoe B there. It was hard to find. There were a number of other ones where we got close, but not quite. This is one of them. It's not quite because this B would have to match the A horseshoe B, and it's not quite there. Yeah, Jake.
Number 9 works.
You say number 9 does work. So, not an example of number 8. But you say it is an example of number 9. Why?
Because it can be, since there's parentheses around the A and B, right? About both of them, it can be 7 and 9 because you can choose when it's an entire sentence, when A and B is an entire sentence, and when A and B is 2 things.
Good. So, how do we, so in Form 9, which one should go with P?
A,
So P should just go here, right?
Yep.
And then how about Q?
B.
Right there? And then how about R?
It's the entire
It's the
thing.
whole right side.
And you can choose if it's not, or if it is, it doesn't use 7 also.
Good. So, it's an example of both Form 7 and 9, and we can sort of switch it around by deciding which form goes with which individual sentence. So we can make our A, P, B, Q, and A horseshoe B R to get that form. Or we can make A horseshoe B our P, A our Q, and B our R to get that other form in 7. Okay. How was that? Was that hard?
Okay.
Nope. Jake, why
Sort
are
of
you
hard by the
doing
end, I
that?
hope.
You have to be kicked away from the
James, can you
camera.
stop a sec? What? James,
Must get a little tricky by the end. And what?
Have we finished that sheet?
Yeah.
You finished that sheet?
Why don't we
About our time.
wrap
Okay.
it up?
Wait.
We'll start on 42
Really?
on Thursday.
Why does class so bad?
40.
We need 42.
We need to.
Did you get 42?
Which one?